Alrighty, welcome everybody. Let me, oh, Jonathan, are you requesting multiple presenters to share?
No.
Okay, I don't know who's doing that, but let's decline that. Welcome everyone. My name is Can. I'm with Linkso, and I've got Jonathan Propp from UC Master Gardener, who has been a Master Gardener since 2008. And go ahead and text your questions via chat, and then we'll address them sort of throughout the talk. There are several sections where Jonathan will pause and ask for your feedback and write those feedback into the chat, and I'll read those out to Jonathan as you folks are writing in. And if you have any questions, send it in under Ask Questions here. So without further ado, welcome, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Ken. Good to see everybody here. Good to be back at Linkso for what went wrong in my summer garden. First, just a little bit of an introduction about the Master Gardeners for those who may not be familiar with us. We're a volunteer branch of UC Cooperative Extension Service, which is a service that exists to support the farmers in the state of California. Every land-grant university in the United States has a cooperative extension service. They do amazing research and support of agricultural community. UCCE is part of UCANR, Agricultural Natural Resources, which many of you may know is based at UC Davis. So UC Davis is the ag school in the UC system. There are master gardeners in every state in the country. There are master gardeners in every county in California. And we exist to provide to the public science-based education about gardening and farming and landscape. We offer a lot of public classes. We have videos. We have all sorts of resources available on our website. We work a lot with community gardens in the area. Yeah, so that's it. There's about 200 of us at this time. We have a new class of trainees starting in January, 35 more. If you are interested in becoming a master gardener, you can find more information on our website and sign up for the next class. Unfortunately, that's going to be 2 years out in 2028. Okay, so let's get into the presentation. We first offered this in 2022. I'm curious if any of you attended the 2022 or 2023 versions of this class at Linkso. If so, you can send a chat to Ken. So one of the master gardeners, Karen Moore, came up with the idea for this class. And the idea is that things go wrong all the time, right? And it's to show you that even for experienced master gardeners, garden disasters happen, okay? So that's what we do in this class. Like I say, gardening requires patience, adaptability, and I think a sense of humor, right? And in the end, you can always go to the farmer's market, right? So the way this class works is that I'm going to show you a problem. I requested examples from the master gardeners themselves. I've been collecting them for a few months. I've curated and organized the examples. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a problem. I'm going to show you some photos. And then just pause for 30 seconds or so. You can think about, we're going to do a little forensics, right? Like you're the gardener. and you look at the problem and think what might have caused that problem. And if you have some thoughts on that, you can send them to Ken in the chat. So I've tried to cover, sort of the most common problems here. But definitely it's oriented toward things that happened this year. And I'll just give you a little spoiler alert right there. You're going to see a lot of this. All right, so this is organized into 4 sections: vertebrate pests, invertebrate pests, diseases, and then environmental, and I call it user error. Um, I will pause at the end of each section for questions. So if you do have questions, send them in the chat, and then Khan will curate them. And then when we do a pause, she'll bring up the questions. All right, let's get started with vertebrate pests. So this is from my garden. Here you see some sun gold tomatoes at the bottom. And I don't know, I think that's a Paul Robeson tomato at the top. So what do you think is going on here? Let's just give it a few seconds. Okay, so obviously it's a vertebrate pest, right? It's something that's got to have some pretty decent teeth to chew into tomatoes. I would say the most likely culprits are going to be rats or mice or squirrels. Okay. You can get tomato damage from birds as well. So that's not to be ruled out. Now, how do you tell the difference between rat and mice damage and squirrel damage? It's not obvious, right? But one clue is that if it's happening at night, it's rats or mice, because squirrels are diurnal. Squirrels are going to be most active early morning and just before dusk, whereas rats and mice are active at night. So if you have this problem, and a lot of us have this problem, traps are a good solution. There you obviously rat traps, mouse traps. There are also squirrel traps. I do some other things to shield my tomatoes from vertebrate pests, and I will share that with you a little later in the presentation. Now, one thing to be aware of is that you can harvest tomatoes before they're, completely perfect on the vine. Okay. When the tomatoes start to get soft, that's when your vertebrate damage, pest damage is going to increase. Everything's going to go after it because it's a lot easier to bite into. And the birds will go after it then too. It is possible to harvest tomatoes before they're fully ripe. So a good rule of thumb is that when they're about 50% colored with the color that they're going to get, even if they're firm, you can pick them then without really any impact on flavor. There's a whole lot of science behind that, but basically once the tomato gets to be a certain point, the plant kind of shuts off the sugar production to it, and it's really just ripening on the vine. So I do this now all the time. I pick my tomatoes early and I put them in baskets in the garage and let them ripen in the garage. You want to put them in a place that doesn't get too hot, doesn't get too much direct sunlight, and you have to have adequate ventilation around them. You don't want tomatoes touching each other because those are spots where they're going to get soft and go bad. Okay. I am just going to close the door here. All right, so moving on. More tomato damage. This came from another master gardener. And you can see what she said. Rats and ground squirrels, but rats really went after the tomatoes. It seems like all the neighbor rats are coming by. So key point there is a lot of times the rats are not coming from your yard, right? That's a problem. A lot of times the rats are coming from your neighbor's yard, which you can't control. Rats like to make their nests in cluttered, covered spaces. And if your neighbor has a junk pile, there's nothing you're going to be able to do about that. Okay. So this master gardener said, I've been picking the tomatoes a bit earlier to try and get as many as possible, but they even eat the green ones. I've never had so much predation as this year. I heard the same story from a lot of master gardeners this year. There were a lot of rat problems going on. Here's a good one. This person went away for a few weeks and something ate the entire plant. That's pretty impressive. And what's interesting is if you look at the photo here, it looks like there's chicken wire around the container. Um, I will tell you that I've seen squirrels just climb up and down chicken wire. It does not deter them at all. Um, so this could have been rats, could have been squirrels, but this is pretty impressive. All right, here we go. Winter squash. Look at this one. Um, again, this is someone who went away for a while. And this is what they found when they got back. So look at this, clearly some sort of vertebrate, right? Could be rats, right? Could be squirrels. Both are capable of doing that. Okay. Um, I have been known with winter squash to actually net them once they've formed and they're just getting bigger. And of course, when you net them, you need to leave space for them to grow. Um, but sometimes they chew through the netting. Okay, here's a good one. This is an agave plant that one of our master gardeners sent in. What do you think is going on here? Something so that the leaves are intact, right? Something chewed out the core of the agave plant. Con, did anybody come up with this one?
No,
Nope. Okay.
really. And
Right.
folks, just to remind everyone, for those who came in late, feel free to text us your comments and questions via chat. And
So a rat or a squirrel probably isn't going to clamber over the leaves of an agave plant because that's painful, right? So somebody came up from it underneath and ate their way up the stem and sucked out the sweet inside of the plant. So that's probably your clue that this is a gopher. And the funny thing is, this came from our gopher trapping expert, Janice Moody, who lives over on the coast. So she said, a gopher had eaten out the sweet core of the plant, killing it. I've seen one gopher take out an agave over 6 feet tall. And if you've ever seen gopher damage, like, the plant will just keel over and die because they're eating from the roots upward. And that's sort of your clue that you've got gopher damage. Um, so what do you do about gophers? You can trap gophers, and Janice has a video on our website about how to do that. Not with everything, but with succulents, you can use wire baskets around the roots of the succulents. And then the other point is if you're ever building a raised bed anywhere in our two counties, um, you always need to line the bottom of the bed with hardware cloth. Hardware cloth, if you're not familiar with it, is a metal mesh with a generally like a 1/4 inch weave, and the gophers can't get through it. So anytime you build a raised bed, you have to, dig down for your bed and then line the bottom with hardware cloth before you put the soil in there. All right, so that's gophers. What other good vertebrate pests are there out there? Lemons. What do you think is going on here? So the rinds of the lemon are being chewed. It's a little hard to tell from this photo, but I think if you look here and over here, somebody's actually gnawing on the limbs of this lemon tree. Okay. I do not have lemons in my yard, but my neighbors do. And there have been years where I've seen a ton of this with lemons, where the rinds are just chewed off the lemons and they're all over the ground. So this is a rat thing, okay? Rats actually like to eat the rind of lemons. They don't like, the fruit inside. It's too sour for them, but they eat the peels. And in doing the research on this appears to be a particular problem with Meyer lemons because the rinds are sweeter with Meyer lemons. And obviously this is not their favorite food, right? But when their other food sources are scarce, that's when they're going to go after your lemons. The same thing is true for squirrels, right? Squirrels, wouldn't normally eat tomatoes, right? Um, but they're going to go after their tomatoes when they're desperate for food. And that's going to be generally as the summer wears on because you think about squirrels, they gather acorns and a ton of nuts in the fall, they bury them for the winter, and by the end of the spring, they've kind of worked through their stash. And so summertime is the desperate time for them when they're going to go after your stuff. Okay, here's a fruit tree issue. Pretty obvious what the culprit is here. Um, so squirrels are a huge problem, all up and down the peninsula, on the coast side and on the bay side. In my opinion, and with the people I talk to, the problem's gotten much worse over the years. Um, there's two causes that people seem to talk about. One is with warmer winters, their breeding season is extending, so they're having more breeding cycles. And the other is loss of predators. So hawks, owls, those are things that are going to go after squirrels. So really the best thing to do is to net your fruit trees, and I'll show you an example of that. If you are going to net your fruit trees, you need to make sure it doesn't get too big so that you can actually reach over the top. And then, last point is, a lot of us have fences between our yards, and you all know that the top of the fences are what I call squirrel highways. The squirrels just run down those things. So if your fruit trees are close to the fences, that's a very easy, an easy jump for the squirrels. All right. Beans. So this was sent in by one of the master gardeners. Look at these pole beans. Like something's munching the leaves and the flowers. So no beans are growing. Um, um, can we get people to turn off their video, please? Um, that would just be helpful to me.
I
Um,
I don't think they can do the video, but yeah.
I've got one person on video. Um, Not a big deal, but a little distracting. Okay, so any thoughts? What might be chewing these beans? So there's a lot of things that might chew on your beans. It could even be invertebrate pests coming up from the soil. But more likely it's going to be a vertebrate pest of some sort. Rats and mice um, will eat your bean leaves and your flowers. I had this same problem, and so I borrowed a friend's critter cam, which is an infrared camera that gets triggered by motion. And I got a great shot of a couple of beady red eyes staring out at the camera, which was probably a rat. They can climb your trellis just fine. So can mice. Now, with beans, you also need to think about birds. And birds particularly will go after the young seedlings. So one thing to think about with beans is that you could put a floating row cover over them. Now, beans are self-pollinating, so you don't need pollinators to fly in there. Um, but obviously that's only going to work so long with pole beans. But with bush beans, you could actually leave them under floating row covers pretty much the whole time. Um, but if you put them under floating row covers when they're young, then that's going to protect them at the time when they're most vulnerable to damage, to bird damage, to rat or mice damage. And then they're going to be more robust, and you can take the cover off, and hopefully they'll make it from there. But I will show you what I do with my beans now to protect them. Here's a different bean example. So you got plenty of leaves here, perfectly healthy pole beans, but the tops are being chewed off here. Um, could be somebody climbing up the trellis. At this height, I'd say it's more likely to be a bird problem. Um, this is not going to kill the bean, but it's definitely going to slow it down, right? Because you're losing new growth in places. Okay, I'm gonna here. Oh, I think this is the last one. Here's a corn problem. So somebody's chewed off the ears and the stem, and then here somebody has just sawed them off, right, at the base level. Um, that takes a pretty good set of teeth to do, right? So that's probably going to be a rat issue there. But that's pretty impressive work right there. So I was, wondering, is the rat problem worse than it used to be? Because I was getting a lot of anecdotal evidence that this was a really bad rat year for a lot of people. I showed you two photos of tomato damage from rats. I probably got five or six from various master gardeners. Um, so like I was looking around to see if there was anybody was talking about that. And lo and behold, the San Francisco Chronicle had an article a few days ago about almonds. And so almond rats causing $300 million in 1 year in damages to the state's almond crop. And the main culprit was roof rats, which is mostly what we have around here. Um, Now, commercial farmers have options open to them, specifically rodenticides, that you and I, as home gardeners, are not allowed to use. And I would say they're not things you would want to use either, because they make the rats die a sort of painful death. So really your only option, but the state has been bit by bit sort of tightening restrictions on what farmers can use and getting rid of the most egregious rodenticides out there. And so farmers are having to, come up with new ways to, to deal with their rat problems. For the home gardener, really your only option is rat trapping. And I will say, if you are thinking about rat trapping, do some research first. There's a lot of stuff out there on the internet about how to trap rats. They are very intelligent animals. And it's not just a matter of putting down a trap and, putting some nuts on it and walking away. Like you really need to take your time to trap rats. But, we have a rat problem and you need to be prepared for that and think of ways how you're going to deal with it. So these are a couple of things that I have started doing to deal with vertebrate pests. So these are my pole beans here. And um, so they're growing up a very simple homemade trellis in there. And then I have garden stakes around the outside of it, and I wrap tulle around it, Tulle. Most men have never heard of tulle. Most women have. It's a woven synthetic material that's used in dressmaking, making veils for brides and things like that. Um, and I was, really having problems with my bean crop. And then a couple of years ago, I just started doing this, and I've had two good bean crops in a row. So whoever was getting into my beans and however they were doing it, this seems to be enough of a deterrent to them. And you can probably see down here, the tool you can buy in big swatches that are 10 feet wide. So I just take a big swatch and wrap it around and then cut it. It comes in 50-yard by 10-foot swatches. And then I fasten, whoops, sorry. Um, I fasten it with binder clips, the regular old binder clips that you would use to clip paper together. You just clip it onto the stakes, works just great. And then when I need to get in there to harvest beans, all I have to do is undo a couple of the clips, and it's like a door opening up, and I can reach in and get my beans. Like I said, beans are self-pollinating, so this doesn't affect production. And I don't cover them fully because these beans will grow to like 10, 12 feet. So I just let them grow out the top and work their way around. Okay, so that's my beans. And now you can also use tool to protect fruits. So here is my beloved Empire apple tree. Um, Believe it or not, I will get on average about 130 apples off of this small tree in a year. And I've deliberately kept it from getting too tall so that I can reach over the top with tool. And so I just have, tool wrapped around. It's all fastened with binder clips, etc. Um, and that's the only way I get apples. If I didn't do this, I would probably lose most of the fruit. And then, of course, tomatoes are a fruit as well. So this is how I protect my tomatoes from, whoever is getting into them, whether they be rats or squirrels. So I have, it's hard to see, but this is 6 containers in a rectangle. And once again, I take 8-foot garden stakes, put them around it, and just wrap the tool around, fasten it out with binder clips. And then the other thing that I really try to do is to make sure that the tool comes down to the ground, and I weight it down at the ground, either with pieces of lumber or stones or something like that, to try and prevent any incursion underneath the tool. And once again, this seems to work. Do I still find tomato damage? Absolutely. Um, but as I said, I have taken to picking my tomatoes on the early side and letting them ripen indoors. Okay, and then this is another approach to squirrel management. It's a little bit more expensive than some of the other things I've highlighted. This approach is called Kira. So we'll just run that one again in case you missed it the first time. So just trying to keep the humor in the presentation. Kira is our little cattle dog mix, and she just patrols the backyard for squirrels. Okay, that's it for vertebrate pests. Do we have any questions?
Yes, we have a couple questions. Going back to the beginning here, it's more so a comment slash question. Tomatoes don't have to be in the sun to continue to get ripe. My garage is dark. I guess.
Yes, they do not. They do not. So the sun is not ripening the tomato. Okay? The sun is photosynthesizing, is providing photosynthesis for the green leaves of the tomato, right? Which are turning the sun energy and water and minerals that are coming up through the roots into sugars, right? And the sugars are going into the tomato to make the tomato, right? And what is a tomato? A tomato is just a lot of food for the seeds of the tomato plant, right? Um, so once the tomato reaches a certain level of maturity, and again, it's when it's like 50% colored, then that process shuts off. Okay. Um, and the and so the tomato itself is not growing anymore. It's not getting any more sugar from the plant. The ripening, the coloring is what is it called? Is it ethylene? Um, it's a gas, right? It's a gas that's emitted by the fruit, and that causes the coloration and the softening. So you've always heard, if you want things to ripen more quickly, you put them in a paper bag with a banana, right? That's because the banana is outgassing ethylene, okay? And that will help whatever is in the bag with it to ripen. So it's the ethylene gas that is ripening the tomato, not the sun. So if you cut that tomato off and you put it in your garage on a basket, it will continue to off gas and ripen. Doesn't need the sun.
Thank you. Okay, a few more questions here. What's the website that you mentioned at the start, where you can learn more about the Master Gardener program and future classes? I think you may put this up at the end.
It's at the end. So yes, and it's at the very end of the presentation, which you will all get afterwards. And there's another website which is really, really useful, and that is UCANR's Integrated Pest Management website, or IPM. And it's a great website. You can search it by type of pest, you can search it by type of plant, and they just list all these different pests and how to manage them. And they have photos of a lot of them, so you can, like, take a photo of the damage and see how it matches, or if you happen to catch a photo of like an invertebrate pest, you can match that with the photo. So I also include the URL for that in a slide at the end.
Shared that just via chat now, so for those who are looking at the chat, you can check that out there. Thank you. And the next question is, do ultrasonic devices work to deter pests?
I don't know. Anecdotally, I haven't seen any evidence of that, and I don't know what the scientific research says about that.
Okay. So this person, they have deer nibbling on new growth on their
Yeah.
lemon trees. Are there any good deterrents other than surrounding the tree with chicken wire?
Uh, I'm not even sure chicken wire will work. The great writer John McPhee called deer rats with long legs. They will eat anything. And again, it's, when their food sources get scarce, that's when they're gonna stroll into your yard. Um, Deer fencing is an elaborate business, and you need to do your research on it. Deer can jump a 6-foot fence with no problem at all. Um, and I live in Menlo Park. We rarely get deer around because I live over on the bay side of Menlo Park. On the hillside of Menlo Park, yeah, people get deer all the time. On our side, not so much, but people build entire fenced-in enclosures to protect from deer. And it's like the only way they can protect their crops from deer. It's really, really, really hard.
So here's the
And let me also say that the Kira approach to vertebrate pest management would not work with deer because a deer could kill a dog pretty easily.
also heard that, I don't know who told me, maybe this was in the past class, but hanging a bar of Irish Spring soap
I don't know.
work as a deer deterrent is what I've heard.
I mean, as a deer deterrent, um, I, I don't know. I mean, try it. If it works, it works. I mean, there are sort of, deer resistant plants. There are some plants that are fragrant that may deter deer. Um, yeah, I mean, you could give it a try, I would always, get online to see if there's any evidence for it. And when you do get online, there's a lot of people online, right, with garden videos and stuff, and it's hard to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff. Um, Look for the agricultural extension services from the state universities, because there you're going to find just solid science-based research.
One, well, I guess this is more so a comment, but I find that gopher stakes help in my garden as well as geraniums. However, the gophers will always find another way out, and I find holes in other places.
Yep. Yep. And that gophers are very smart little creatures, as are all these vertebrate pests. Okay, we should probably move on. What do you think?
Yes. Uh,
Okay.
just a last comment. I've read that lion poo deters deer. I'm guessing mountain lion.
Um, yeah, I probably, if I were a deer, I'd stay away from it. I don't know. I mean, I've also heard about fox urine for squirrels. I yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But with the mountain lion poo, I guess my question is, how are you going to get it? Sounds like a dangerous uh, pastime.
So I think we can move on.
Okay, good old invertebrate pests. It's a good year for invertebrate pests. Here's some tomatoes someone set in. Okay, tomatoes fine. You got all these little white specks on there. Little hard to see, but little white specks on the leaves up here of the tomato plant. This is, this is a pretty easy to identify thing. Quite common in our area, right? This is aphids. Okay. Um, so in addition to getting a lot of rat stuff this year, I got a lot of aphid stuff, way more than usual. Why would that be? Well, we had a very cool and damp summer, right? All of June, all of July, almost all of August, right? So much cooler and more humid than normal throughout San Francisco and San Mateo counties. And for those people, who were in or near the fog belt parts of our territory, like you didn't even see any sun for weeks on end. Aphids love that kind of weather. Okay. And so that's probably the reason we just had an aphid boom this summer. So the good news about aphids is that they're probably not going to kill your plant. They're not going to damage the fruit. They are not interested in the fruit. What they are interested in is the moisture inside of the leaves, and they drill up from the bottom side of the leaf because the top side is more resistant. The bottom side is softer. So your aphids are going to tend to congregate on the underside of leaves. Um, so they're not going to damage your fruit. They're not going to kill the tomato. I will say, because I've had aphid infestations on things like plum trees and such. If it's a big enough infestation, the leaves will, they will curl up, right? Like you're seeing here. And they get, what's called honeydew. Honeydew is a fancy name for aphid poop. It's the black, sticky stuff that you'll see on the leaves when you have an aphid infestation. And then you will get ants because the ants are attracted to the honeydew. They like to eat the honeydew. So if you get a big infestation, it will cause leaf damage and that will affect plant growth. Okay. But aphids are pretty simple to deal with. You just have to be regular about hosing them off, but you have to hose off the underside of the leaf. So if you have a hose sprayer and it has a horizontal setting where it does a horizontal spray, um, then you just go from underneath and spray them off. And you do it every day for a while or every other day or something like that, and it will beat back the aphids for sure. It'll do enough for you. Now, many of you have probably heard about lady beetles eating aphids. Um, I don't know if you've ever tried, but it's very common for people to buy lady beetles. Lady beetles are the official name for ladybugs. Um, I, like many others, have bought lady beetles, taken them in my garden, opened it up, and they just fly off to my neighbor's yard. Um, if you are going to use lady beetles, do your research on how to properly release lady beetles. There are better ways to do it so that they don't fly away and they stick around and eat your aphids rather than somebody else's aphids. Um, there are other beetles that will eat aphids too, and I've got an example here later on. Okay, broccoli. We got these little white guys on the leaves here, right? Right. Well, there's more aphids. Okay, these are known as cabbage aphids, right? Um, and with any aphid infestation, the younger the plant, the more endangered it's going to be. A mature plant is going to lose some leaves here and there. It's not going to affect it. But a young plant can't afford to lose, too many leaves, okay? So you need to be particularly attentive to your young plants. Like I said, keeping them under floating row covers will help, okay? Because aphids are flying insect. Here's some great photos one of the master gardeners sent me. These are taken with an iPhone, by the way, which is just amazing. Look at this on these beans here, just masses of them. Here's a kale um, plant, right? And you see because they are sucking into the leaves. Like there is damage to the leaves, although I think she inadvertently got this guy in the photo. And we're going to see this guy later on, and that might be a little bit of a clue as to what's going on. Um, Here's a photo she got of a soldier beetle. Um, Soldier beetles are pretty common. Um, in in my experience, they're pretty evil looking. Um, they have these sort of orangey red heads and black bottoms and stuff. But they love aphids. So, this guy's not going to eat your fruits or vegetables. This guy's going to eat your aphids. All right. So here's a lemon tree, right? So see the leaves, they're sort of brown and curling up and drying out and so forth. This is not aphids. This is something else. So this is called the citrus leaf miner. And why are they called leaf miners? Well, um, they're called miners because they eat their way in between the bottom side and the top side of the leaf. So essentially, they're mining their way through the leaf, hence the name leaf miners. And what that causes is it causes these sort of dry, brown, dead patches within the leaves. And eventually the leaf just gets sort of papery and falls apart. Um, Now with lemons, they're gonna go after the more tender young leaves as opposed to the older leaves. So again, this is the kind of thing where you want to protect your younger plants, and you can't spray the minors off, right? Because they're inside the leaf. So unlike the aphids, you can't spray them off. Peppers. Okay, so someone sent me this photo of peppers. Um, there's a hole in this pepper here. And then this person cut open the pepper and there's a little guy here. And this one should be familiar to many of you, right? Um, there are these little pincers at the back, and that's a clear sign that you've got earwigs, okay? Now, earwigs live in the soil. They don't fly in. Um, they will saw off your seedling stems sometimes on vegetables. Um, so they do come out at night and they nest in the daytime. Um, and so to to see, I mean, sometimes you'll see earwigs during the daytime, like if you're digging in the soil, because they're just hiding, right? But to see them out, you go out there at night with a flashlight, and then you can see if you have an earwig infestation. The common method for dealing, so earwigs are everywhere. A lot of people have earwig problems. Like with a lot of things, they're going to damage younger plants more than older plants, partly because they live in the ground. And so, the closer things are to the ground, the more susceptible they are to earwig damage. So you can trap earwigs. This is the common method that is recommended for trapping earwigs. You take like tuna cans and you fill them with a little vegetable oil and you sink them down so the top of the can is at ground level. So they kind of walk along and they fall into the oil. Okay, Swiss chard. Very common problem with Swiss chard. I had it for years. So again, you see the sort of brown papery nature of the leaf, and some of the leaf just kind of falls away because it's so thin and papery. So if this looks like what you saw before with the kale, it's because this is a leaf miner. In this case, it's the beet leaf miner. Chard are very close to beets. And so the beet leaf miner attacks chard leaves and beet leaves. In my experience, it tends to be most prevalent in the spring. Um, like you can still eat the leaves, like this leaf here that's, half of it's gone, the rest is fine. The brown part doesn't taste very good, but you can eat the rest of the leaves. Um, it won't kill the plants, right? If you do have beet leaf miner damage, you want to get those leaves out of there as quickly as you can to prevent them from spreading around the plant. Um, it's kind of hard to do sometimes, and they will spread around. So the best thing I have found for beet leaf miners is a floating row cover. I keep all my Swiss chard under floating row covers, and it really has mostly eliminated this problem for me because they do fly in. And so if you have them covered, the miners can't get in there. All right, kale. This was from my garden. So if you look at these kale plants, they've just been stripped, okay? But my lettuce seedlings were fine. They just ignored the lettuce seedlings. I had some arugula in here, and the arugula was fine. It was under a floating row cover. So my first thought was, okay, this looks like mice to me. So I just put a bunch of mouse traps in the bed and didn't catch any mice. Um, then I had a bunch of kale that I had harvested in the refrigerator, and I was pulling it out to make a salad, and this guy fell out of the bag, and he was still alive. So you may be familiar with this little creature. He's called a cabbage looper. And cabbage looper eat the leaves of cole crops. Cole crops refers to all the cruciferous vegetables. So, um, cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, kale, okay, Brussels sprouts. Um, so those are their chosen hosts, and it's the larvae that do the eating. So these green guys here, um, once they turn into moths, then they're going to fly away. But they've already deposited eggs on your plant, and those eggs are going to turn into new cabbage looper larvae. Okay, so the way to get rid of cabbage loopers is to spray them off. Okay, if in time, which I didn't do because I had them under floating row covers, so I didn't see that they were getting stripped. And in as a classic dumb gardener move, I went out to the nursery and bought some kale um, some kale seedlings to plant to replace the ones that I'd grown from seed and that had been chewed off. I planted those. A week later, those were stripped because I still had cabbage loopers around. So it was only after I had just kept all kale out of the bed for a few months that I was able to replant with kale because it seemed like there were no more loopers left. Okay, here are shishito peppers. Someone sent in. You can see they were just, chewed right off. Okay, so plants weren't going to grow. I mean, this could really be a lot of things. But she found pill bugs down in the lower right. I seem to have lost my cursor somewhere. I don't know where it is. Um, so down in the lower right, that's a pill bug. We've all seen pill bugs, right? They're called roly-poly bugs because they roll up into tight circles. They're everywhere in our gardens. And this is a particularly bad pill bug infestation, right? Your sort of pill bug here and there are not going to do this much damage. So, like earwigs, you do the beer traps for pill bugs. But I find with the beer traps, it's hard to do with both earwigs and pill bugs. I think they're just everywhere, and you tolerate a little bit of damage, but hopefully not a lot of damage. Here is one that was sent in, eggplant. If you look again, lower right here, you can see, little things on the undersides of the leaves there. And so, you can see on the picture of the whole eggplant that the leaves are they're kind of flipped upside down and they're curling in on themselves. Um, so so this little photo in here, she actually got a photo of the culprits, and those are spider mites. Okay, so again, spider mites are going to attack the underside of the leaves, and they have these nice little uh, beaks that they stick in there. And so, over time, this will damage the leaves, which will reduce growth on the plant. So, like aphids, you can hose these guys off if you catch the problem in time. All right, here's a citrus example. Again, underside of the leaves, something sort of white and small. So these are citrus whiteflies. Again, they're going in from the bottom, and the same end result. It dries out the leaves because they're sucking out the xylem, and that'll cause the leaves to wilt. They create honeydew, and honeydew reduces photosynthesis because you've got a black leaf and not a green leaf, right? So again, hose spray the underside of the leaves. Here's a good one that one of our master gardeners sent in, and there's an obvious clue here, right? She has caught the particular culprit up there, the little black thing, but the foamy stuff is a giveaway, right? And this is known as a spittle bug, right? Because it looks like the foam looks like spittle. So the foam is actually like it's their way of building a nest and protecting themselves. But you see this all over the place, right? On trees, on plants, etc. Again, it's not going to kill the plant, and you can very easily just hose it off, and that'll protect the plant. Okay, pause for questions on invertebrate pests.
So a couple questions here. First one is, won't hosing off the leaves cause other issues like mildew?
Hang on, I just found my cursor again. Um, well, do it in the morning and let it dry out in the sun. If you it's a good question, but I would I would say do it early enough so that it has a chance to dry off in the day. Don't do it in the evening.
Okay, and then this is just a comment. It says caveat emptor, buyer beware. Companies selling ladybugs exaggerate the package count by a factor of at least 10.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. But I've also heard buying ladybugs is really bad.
I I haven't had any success with them. And honestly, the hose technique works just fine.
Okay, that's it for this session, and I think we can move on.
Okay, let's go into diseases. It was a great disease year. All right. Everyone's going to know this one. This is a common problem. We got a squash, and we have this white powdery stuff on the leaf. That's the giveaway, right? This is powdery mildew. And squash are very susceptible to it, right? Cucumbers as well. Powdery mildew is a problem everywhere in our territory. It's an airborne fungal disease. The powder or the fungal spores, it loves cool, damp weather. And we, as I said, had a very cool, damp summer. So everyone had powdery mildew this year. And I'm going to show you more powdery mildew. Once a leaf gets powdery mildew, you want to get it out of there as quick as you can to prevent it from spreading. In my experience, I've never had much luck with that. It just, once you got it, it spreads from leaf to leaf to leaf. And again, what happens when you lose leaves? Well, the plant loses sugar production, so you lose fruit production, and you're on your way to a dead plant, basically. Really hard to control. So what can you do? And there's no treatment. There's no, once it's there, you can't put an antifungal agent on it. That doesn't work. So what can you do? There are, in air quotes, powdery mildew resistant varieties of squash. Um, you know, you may have success with that. Some people report limited success with that. But definitely if it's a big problem in your area, you should try those. Um, the other thing that you can do is create conditions that allow for better ventilation and airflow, right? So if the squash is contained, right, that coolness and dampness is going to remain, but you really want wind flow going through there to dry it out. And so the key thing is spacing, right? To allow adequate space. And, with a lot of squash, that's hard, right? Because they're big, rangy plants. But it's really important to allow adequate space between them to try to avoid powdery mildew. But like I said, it was everywhere this summer. I just got so many master gardeners talking about powdery mildew. Um, this is powdery mildew on tomatoes. And this is not something I've seen very often. Tomatoes get a whole host of other problems, but powdery mildew on tomatoes is much rarer. Um, so again, this was just a result of this very cool, damp summer that we had. Now, here's some other tomato issues. So you can see yellowing leaves down here, yellowing and drying leaves up there. Um, Honestly, yellowing leaves can be anything with tomatoes, right? It can be too little water, it can be too much water, it can be insufficient nutrients. The list goes on and on and on. Furthermore, some yellowing of the older leaves at the base of the tomato is just natural, right? That as the tomato grows up, you have yellow leaves at the bottom. That's, just kind of natural stuff. But when you're getting it further up the plant, then, something is going on, right? Um, so the spots, the dark spots here on this yellowed leaf could be septoria leaf spot, which is a fungus. Um, so, one thing a lot of experienced tomato gardeners do is, so first of all, overhead spraying can cause some of these soil-borne funguses to get blasted up and land on the leaves, which is when you start to get problems, okay? So, the fungus is in the soil, and you want to try not to have that get up from the soil onto the leaves. Um, so, as much as possible, drip irrigation for tomatoes is the best because it's going to be just at the base of the tomato. If you have to water with a hose sprayer, try to do it down at the base of the plant at a lower volume, so that you're not kicking up soil. And then the other thing a lot of experienced gardeners do is they remove at the bottom roughly 6 inches of leaves, to prevent that from happening. Um, Now, obviously, you don't do it until the plant is tall enough to survive losing leaves at the base. So, as the tomato gets taller and taller, it gets to be a few feet high, etc., then you can start removing those bottom leaves to, hopefully prevent some of the soil-borne funguses from climbing up the plant. We could do a whole class on tomato diseases. This was not this year. This was from a previous year, but it's a big, big problem. So the plant is basically turning brown and dying here, right? This is the clue right in here, okay? If you cut, obviously this plant's dead, so you can just cut it down. And if you cut the stem, and see this sort of tan brown there in the xylem, that is a giveaway for one of these two wilts, Fusarium and Verticillium wilt, because they move their way from the soil up through the xylem and just kill the plant. Um, these are huge, intractable problems. And once it's in your soil, it's in your soil. So then you have two options. One is don't plant any tomatoes or tomato relatives, nightshade plants, for like a few years. In order to, let that fungus die out. You can solarize your soil, which is to, heat it up to a very high temperature, which you're going to do in the summertime. And that is a way to kill the fungus as well. There are Fusarium and Verticillium wilt resistant tomatoes. And when you see a tomato variety, F1 refers to Fusarium wilt resistance, and V1 refers to Verticillium wilt resistance. So if that is another way you can deal with this problem, is to buy those varieties. Those are going to be, newer hybrid varieties. And if you're growing heirlooms or you want to grow heirloom tomatoes, they're not going to have that bred-in resistance to the wilts. So your heirlooms are going to be more susceptible to these wilts. But it's a big problem and hard to get rid of. These are from my garden. So I actually had a pretty good tomato crop this year, like I said, in Menlo Park, despite the cool weather, because, tomatoes will not set fruit if the evening temperatures are below 55 degrees. And it took a long time for the nighttime temperatures to reach 55 this year. But surprisingly, I had a really good crop of tomatoes, but it was weird in that I got a ton of tomatoes, and then it was like the tomato plants were done. They just looked awful. Um, and I had some yellowing of the leaves, and then it's a little hard to see in this photo here, but other leaves were sort of blackish. Um, and so, that was affecting photosynthesis, right? And reducing fruit production. So I had like great crop and, I had a lot of tomatoes ripening in the garage and everything. But then, I mean, usually the indeterminate tomatoes keep on going, right? And you get, sort of a second and a third crop of tomatoes. And that wasn't really happening. I am now getting sort of that second crop of tomatoes, but they're a lot smaller. And that's because, of whatever's going on with these leaves. So, like, I've got beefsteaks, but the tomatoes that are coming off the beefsteaks are, sort of the size of classic tomatoes. So a lot of master gardeners talked about unusual tomato crops this year. And the same problem that I had was echoed by a few of them. It's like, yeah, I had a great crop, and then it's like they just were done. Um, so I honestly don't know what caused that, but I gotta believe it had something to do with our weather. Um, and one other interesting bit of forensics was that certain heirloom varieties in my garden were worse hit than others. I had like two heirloom varieties that were the worst hit, and after their initial crops of tomatoes, they were essentially dead, and I took them out. And others were more resistant. And that whole thing just sort of suggests to me there's something fungal, there's some fungal disease going on. And I just think it was all due to our wacky summer weather. All right. So that was it for mildews and fungal infections. Any questions, Ken?
Yeah, we got a few here. So my eggplant growth was stunted. It
Yeah.
had plenty of water and sun, but would only grow about 3 inches. Any insight? It's a second generation plant.
Second generation plant. I'm not sure what that means. Um, can you ask the same person what they meant by second generation eggplant?
Yes, if they can, oh, same plant from last year.
Wow, I didn't even know eggplants could overwinter. Um, so that could be the reason. I mean, I has the same person overwintered eggplants before and had good production?
They said, they said no, Jonathan.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So honestly, I'm not. I haven't done the research specifically on eggplants as to whether they can uh, come back a second year, but I didn't think any of the nightshade family plants, which are tomatoes and eggplants and peppers, did that. Um, so that could have been the reason. Um, but again, it was a very unusual summer. So even if you were in a place that um, you were getting sun, you weren't in the fog belt, it was just a lot cooler than normal. And in my experience, eggplant um, really need heat. Of all the things you grow in your summer garden, eggplant really like heat. I have never grown eggplants terribly well, and I'm on the bay side of Menlo Park, and it just doesn't get super hot here in the summertime. I was growing some eggplants, and they were small too. They were smaller varieties, but even for that, they were small. And I'm just going to chalk that up to weather.
Alrighty. So the next question is, how does one solarize? Put a black tarp or plastic over the soil, and for how long does it need to reach what temperature, and how deep must the hot temperature be measured?
Yeah, so I'm not going to go into the specifics here, but yes, you're basically on the right path there. You're going to do black plastic because it can absorb a lot of sunlight and heat up. There's a lot of good stuff that you can find. I would imagine that UC A&R has good instructions on how to solarize soil.
Ready? The next question is, how can I tell the difference between a spider mite versus a spider problem? I get a ton of spider webs on the edges of my raised bed and citrus trees daily. So I just remove the webs. I don't see any damage on the plants.
So the spiders are not eating your plants. The spiders are eating invertebrates. Okay, your spiders are great. They're they're eating the stuff that you don't want eating your plants, right? Um, so spider mites, I don't know how they got that name other than I guess maybe they're eight-legged. Spider mites are really, really small. So that photo that I included was blown up many times by an iPhone. So, you need a good zoom lens or a loop, which is a magnifying glass, to really spot spider mites. They're a lot smaller than spiders.
Is there anything that we can do now to improve our soil for next summer?
Yes, absolutely. That's like a whole other class, but basically, the fall is the time that most of us work on soil improvement. So, probably the number one thing you can do is adding good compost. And Ken, I don't know if you know of any vendors of really good compost in the area.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So the links
But
out, the Diestel compost is the best out there. And yeah, so a good 2 to 3 inches of compost, kind of sifted into the soil. Um, if you grew heavy feeders, which are plants that take up a lot of nutrients from the soil, and most of the summer vegetables we like to eat are heavy feeders. So like corn, tomatoes, eggplant, uh, squash, etc. Those are going to be heavy feeders. If you grew those, you're going to need to replenish the soil with nutrients. So that could be some organic fertilizer that you would add in the fall with the compost, kind of sift that into the soil again. Another thing you can do is to cover crop. Um, Cover cropping adds nutrients to the soil. Many of the cover crops provide nitrogen into the soil. Um, so cover cropping is another way to replenish the soil. Um, if you cover crop, you can't grow winter vegetables in the same bed. So it's a choice you got to make. In my beds, I don't get a lot of winter sun because the sun angle is much lower in the winter and it gets blocked by the neighbor's redwood trees. So I kind of gave up on winter vegetable gardening, and so I'll just cover crop instead. And I use that as a way to replenish the soil. It provides nutrients, but it also builds soil structure. Um, you should generally want to have something growing in your soil at all times. Because if there's nothing in there, the soil just sort of compresses, and if you have things in the soil, their roots are going to maintain a good soil structure. You're going to maintain the mycorrhizal fungi and the whole biome down there. So you want to have something in there over the winter. So you could either, grow winter vegetables if you can, or do a cover crop.
okay, just a comment from one of the attendees. They said that they have had success in overwintering different nightshade varieties.
Okay. Well, that's great. That's great. I have heard of it with peppers. I just never heard of it with eggplant. But again, they're going to be highly susceptible to cold weather. They are very hot weather plants. Okay. So if you are trying to overwinter a nightshade plant, it's probably got to be in an area with mild winters, no frosts, no freezes.
Okay, and that's it. We can move on to the,
Okay. Okay. Environmental and gardener induced. Um, okay, so I didn't have a photo here, but this was a really interesting one. I have a couple of fig trees in my backyard, and at least here in the, I'll call it South Bay, Menlo Park, um, figs generally have two crops. There's the first one, which I discovered through research is called the breba, um, in like May, June timeframe, and then a larger crop in sort of August, September timeframe. So the first crop was a total bust. The figs were small and hard, and they would turn black and just drop. And they were completely inedible and they were tiny. Um, and I was thinking, well, it looks like a water problem, right? Because they're small and hard, but I wasn't doing anything differently. And then I noticed that a lot of the fig trees in the neighborhood were the same way. So that was suggesting to me there was something else going on. Um, and so the my late season crop has been a little more normal. And I see again that in the neighborhood trees. And so I'm guessing this was also just a result of our unusual weather. You know, figs love hot weather. And I think it just wasn't hot enough for them beginning in the early season this year. I don't know if any of you, grow figs and had similar experience. I would love to hear if you did. Okay. Beans. This came in from one of the master gardeners. Blue Lake green beans are just starting to blossom and not a bean in sight. And this was sent in September. Beans were really slow this summer. I kept going out and looking at my beans and, lots of leaves, they look great, and no flowers. Um, so, I did some research and the ideal flowering temperature for beans is 65 to 85. And, here I am in the warm part of San Mateo County, and we had a lot of days it didn't hit 70, right? Um, so the beans were just really, really slow for everyone this year. And you may have had a similar experience. And if you did, don't worry about it. It was one of those wacky things caused by the weather. And I will also say that, if, there were parts of San Francisco and San Mateo counties where there just wasn't a lot of sunlight, right? And that may have contributed to this problem. Summer squash, okay, this is a common thing, right? Here, perfectly healthy squash here and here. This squash grew, but then it sort of yellows and dies. So generally, there's another one over here, same problem, right? And it sort of tapers off and withers and dies. I think we're all familiar with this problem. When we see it, we may not know what causes it. This is insufficient pollination, okay? Um, so if the flower of the female flower of the squash is not pollinated well, then you end up with this sort of half fruit. So squash and all the other cucurbits like cucumbers um, need pollinators. They have two flowers. You've probably seen this with squash. There are some flowers that grow on these stems, and those are the males. And then there are other flowers that don't have those stems, and they're the females. And when those get fully pollinated, the fruit, which is the squash, grows at the base of the flower. And right, and you see the zucchini growing and it's got a little flower at the end, right? That came from the female flower. So you gotta have a pollinator to take the pollen from the male flower to the female flower, okay? And if you don't have pollinators or they can't find the flowers because your squash are a little too congested and the leaves are covering them up and such, then you might not get good pollination. So you can hand pollinate if you want. Go out early in the morning when the male flowers and the female flowers burst open. You take a little paintbrush and get it full of pollen from the male flower. Go to the female flower and dust it with the pollen. Very, very common problem. Cucumbers. So this is a misshapen cucumber from my garden, and then this is a yellow cucumber. So again, misshaped cucumbers are often going to be a pollination problem. Um, high heat can keep your pollinators away. Water stress can be an issue if your tomatoes are yellowing. But it's also a sign they're overripe if they're turning yellow. And if you look at this guy, this is a Japanese cucumber, and they're usually long and skinny, but this guy remained narrow at the top, which was probably a pollination problem. But once it's starting to turn yellowish down here, it's ripe and you want to pick it. Otherwise, you're just going to get massive seeds in there. My experience, at least with the variety of cucumbers I grow, which I say is, again, Japanese cucumber, I tend to see this problem late in the season. I don't know why. Maybe it's because the pollinators aren't around during the hot weather or something like that. Or they're just getting tired. I don't know. This one was sent in. So you've probably all seen this, right? You got sort of a tomato that's half ripe. So what causes that? Well, apparently this can be caused by the blossom, because tomatoes are self-pollinating. They only have a single flower. But when the blossom doesn't line up properly under the stem, apparently, this can cause you to get sort of these lopsided tomatoes. And my suggestion here is, once one half is ripe, just harvest it. As I said, the other half is going to ripen in your garage. And I did see some reports of this year, and I'm just going to guess that this was yet another byproduct of our cool summer. Here's another tomato problem. Many of you have seen this. It's sort of well known to people. It's when the bottom of the tomato turns brown, right? And sort of gets mushy. And this is a problem called blossom end rot. And it's caused by either low levels of calcium in the plant or by inconsistent watering. So either too much or too little, or, not just being consistent with regular watering. So for the calcium problem, some gardeners swear by eggshells. You just save up your eggshells. First, you want to microwave them to kill off any pathogens. And then you really need to grind them up pretty fine, right? Just having chunks of eggshells are not going to break down well. But if you, microwave them to dry them out, kill pathogens, throw them in your food processor, then, you can put that in when you plant the tomato. And some people absolutely swear by that. But the other thing is, if it's a watering problem, just address the watering problem. That said, I have found that some varieties, particularly plum tomatoes, are more susceptible to this than other varieties. Didn't see a lot of tomato. I didn't see much blossom end rot this year, and I didn't get any from other gardeners. This was from a previous class, but I think it's still worth talking about. They sent this in. This was their carrot patch, and the point here is that you have to thin your vegetables, right? Um, Particularly your root crops, right? If your carrots are too close, you're gonna get, skinny carrots, right? If you want big carrots, you need to space them appropriately. And thinning is not something that we like to do very much, and oftentimes we don't even think about it as being important, but it's really important. You need to get out there and thin. And just reminder that when you thin anything, whether it's lettuce or carrots, what you're removing is perfectly edible and often quite tasty. So don't toss that stuff in the compost bucket. Here is an example one master gardener sent in. She just got it in her head that she wanted to transplant her manzanita. Well, it turns out manzanita don't take to transplanting very well. But even if you are going to transplant anything, do not transplant it in the summertime here. You want to transplant it when it's cool and it's the rainy season. And then you want to cut it back massively to give it time to regenerate. And this is my last example. This is my favorite. This comes from a master gardener. I think he was class of 2022. And 2 years ago, he sent me the example of how his neighbor's cat went into his bed and ate all his cilantro, um, which prompted an email exchange between the two of us about how we thought the cat was doing afterwards. This year, he sent in the tomato artichoke sunchoke saga. And I love this example because I think we've all been there. This is the kind of mistake that we all make, and so it's worth sharing. So sunchokes, if you don't know, are also known as Jerusalem artichokes. So they're a tuber crop, right? If you've ever seen a Jerusalem artichoke in the market, it's a it's a it's a it's a kind of a tan tuber thing, right? So he thought, okay, I'm gonna try sunchokes this year, and he planted them in February in the rainy season, which is when you do that. And then a little after that, he planted an artichoke. He's up in San Francisco. Artichokes are a generally cool weather crop. That's why they all grow in Castroville. And so then it came to be summer vegetable planting time, which is, late April around here. And so he then planted tomato in the bed. So so what happened? Okay, you're sort of running through your mind, what could possibly go wrong here? Artichokes are big. Artichokes need a lot of space. So his artichokes started to get big and started to crowd out the little tomato that he'd planted. So he thought, okay, I'm gonna constrain the artichoke so it doesn't grow over the tomato. So he put a tomato cage around the artichoke to prevent it from getting too broad and rangy. Guess what? With the artichoke not getting enough wind and sun amongst the leaves, he got a massive aphid infestation on the artichoke, which eventually killed the artichoke. Okay. And then guess what? If you have never grown sunchokes, they grow to about 12 feet tall and they get lovely yellow flowers on the top that kind of look like sunflowers. So all of a sudden, the artichokes were getting massive, and you can see here they basically shaded out and killed the tomato underneath. Um, and then so then, in the end, he did have one other tomato that survived just fine, and the artichoke started to grow back. Um, so I just love this story because, what's the moral of the story? Well, the moral of the story is you got to understand how big a plant's going to get when you plant it. Okay. If you're going to plant a sunchoke, you got to realize it's going to get to be 12 feet high and it's going to shade anything that, is down, is on the downwind side of the sun from it, right? And if you're going to plant an artichoke, you got to give it a lot of space, right? And then, tall plants generally want to be on the north and east side of the garden bed because the sun is going to come from the south and the west mostly. So if you put your tall plants on that side, they're not going to shade anything. So that's another, good lesson to learn. The other thing is, and he probably couldn't avoid this because he lives in San Francisco and he doesn't have the hugest lot, is that, tomatoes and artichokes really like very different conditions. Generally, artichokes like cool and shade, like I said, and tomatoes generally like sun and heat. Okay, so but I just love this example because, like I said, we've all made this mistake at some point, and so it's good to see that even an experienced master gardener can do this. Okay, so any questions about environmental
Yes,
issues?
we've got a couple here. Squash question. My zucchinis would look great, but when you cut in, there was a lot of brown, and then they would slowly turn brown over the next few days sitting on the counter. Shouldn't they last longer?
Huh? Yeah, that just seems odd to me. Um, so maybe you were picking them too late. Another thing about the cucurbits to bear in mind is that you have to harvest the fruit in order to get more fruit. Because if you don't harvest like a zucchini, and we've all had this happen to us, right? There's the zucchini that you don't find because it's under a leaf somewhere. And when you do find it, it's a baseball bat, right? And it's inedible. And what's been happening is the plant's been sending a lot of sugar and a lot of energy to that zucchini, which you're not going to be able to eat, which is depriving the other zucchini on the plant. So you need to keep harvesting zucchini and cucumbers throughout the summer as they get to decent size, so that you don't have that problem. But I honestly don't can't figure out what's going on there with the zucchini. And, maybe again, it was another one of those weird weather things this year. There were just, there were so many things this year that if you've never had it before, I think it's a fair bet to say, it was just one of those years.
Summer squash question. I have some ones that rot off with a hole on the end if I remove the wilting flower. Yet again, some rot if I leave the flower on. I can't appear to win. Help.
Wow. Not quite sure on that one. Again, these are things where like, so if you look at this slide, you see this link right here. This is the Integrated Pest Management website of UC Agriculture and Natural Resources. This is absolutely essential for questions like that. And you can quite possibly find your answer there. And then the other thing you can do is you can email the Master Gardeners, which is on the final page here. There's our this is our you go to our website and then you're gonna see a link that says Ask a Master Gardener, and we staff these 3 sites throughout the week, and you just take a photo of your problem, give a short description, and you'll generally get an answer within a couple of days. So those are both great resources for answering some of these questions.
Okay, I don't have any more questions. If folks have any questions, do send them in via chat. However, I have a couple comments here. Okay, so the easiest method to hand pollinate squash is to simply clip off a male flower, remove the petals, and brush the female ovaries with the pollen-laden stamens. This is for hand pollinating method, I suppose.
Yeah, sure, that works. Of course, once you've cut it off, you've lost that male flower for good. Whereas the little paintbrush thing, you get a bunch of pollen and you pollinate, and you're not cutting that flower off. So, maybe you can get some pollen from it in the future. But yeah, that absolutely works. And just to say one thing about pollinators, um, you know, um, honeybees get all the press for pollinating, but they're not always the best pollinators. Um, and we have a lot of native bees in our area that do an absolutely great job of pollinating. And uh, I mean, most of us don't have honeybees in our yards, and it is the native bees that are doing the pollinating. So when you think about, pollination, don't think honeybees. Think about the native bees. You can create, bee habitats. There are great things out there about how to create, like, bee homes, for native bees. Of course, you want to plant um, things that are attractive to those pollinators. Flowering plants like lavender, they love lavender, they love rosemary, and they love buddleias. All those plants, if they're, within striking distance of your squash, are going to attract pollinators.
No incoming questions.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time
We're
anyhow.
good.
So again, this is an invaluable website, Integrated Pest Management. Check it out. All sorts of great stuff. California Master Gardener Handbook is a great resource, like 2 inches thick. All the master gardeners use it. It is available to the general public from UCANR. I really use the state agricultural extension websites a lot. And then just a lot of it, the knowledge in this presentation came from other master gardeners. Just want to thank Linkso and Ken. You guys do an awesome job and provide such a great service to the public. And then you'll all get a copy of the presentation. So if you just scan this QR code, that'll sign you up. We have a monthly newsletter, all sorts of great information in it, upcoming events, little tips, etc. You can donate. We're a pure volunteer organization. Our main source of income is our spring seedling sale, which we do in mid-April at the San Mateo Event Center up in San Mateo. We sell thousands of tomato seedlings and other summer plants that we've germinated ourselves. It's a great place. We sell dozens of varieties of tomatoes. So like I said, the helpline is a great resource. It's free advice. And the easiest way is to just go to our website, send us an email, enclose a couple photos, and you'll get answers. So if there are no further questions, then I just want to thank everyone for coming. I hope you found this interesting, entertaining. I hope you learned some things, and remember that stuff happens when you're gardening, and just be patient and learn to laugh about it. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Jonathan. Very informative class. And of course, the class is recorded and will be available at the community resources at linksogarden.com. Thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.